Hey guys, welcome back to my channel, Sharon Reach. I'll be doing my August wrap up. August was a fantastic month for me. I did a readathon the last day of July that ran into August, which helped boost my number so much because for August I read a total of 20 books, and out of those 20 books I read 4 books that were 2 stars, 2 books that were 3 stars, 1 book that was 3.5 stars, 2 books that were 4 stars, 1 book that was 4.5 stars, and then I read a total of 10 5-star reads. So even though I did have quite a few 2-star reads this time around, I think that because of how many 5-star books I did read, or just like 4 and up, I am really happy with my reading for the month of August. I hope I can replicate that for September, which by the way is so far is not going the greatest. I have read I think like 1 book. So yeah, like I started all of my readathons late, and because I was like finishing up other books. Actually I finished 2 books. So far September's not going the greatest. I'm hoping to kind of like do some more readathons towards the end. I also wasn't feeling well in the beginning of the month, so yeah, like it's just a lot of different things that was happening. And then I'm leaving, I'm on a trip for the next week or so. So yeah, just September, I don't think I'll be able to replicate it, but here's to hoping. But anyways, let's just get right into the books that I read for this month. So the first book that I want to discuss is Ace of Shades, which I gave 2 stars. So this book basically follows a young girl called N whose adopted mother had suddenly disappeared. She was supposed to return home to her, but suddenly, like without words, she's like gone missing. So she ends up going to find out what happens to her, and she goes to the city of Sin, where there is a lot of corruption, a lot of, you know, craziness that's happening in that city. And before long she finds herself embroiled with a lot of, you know, like political, I want to say, like strings that's happening, a lot of different like tensions between different like gangs in a way. And she also finds herself with this one guy called Levi, who is actually her only lead due to a letter that her mother sent her a while back saying that if something happens, you know, you go to Levi, he will be able to help you out. So she ends up going to him, and things kind of like spiral from there. Honestly, I felt like this book was just not the greatest. I don't think I'm going to continue on the series. Actually, I'm definitely not going to continue the series. I gave this book 2 stars. So I just felt like there's a lot of things that's happening that felt a little bit confusing at times. I think my audiobook experience might have like hindered this or impacted it at least, but I just really didn't care much for the characters. I didn't care much for the plot. The one part that I thought was interesting was when everything like happened at the end, but that was like essentially it. Like the rest of the story, I was more confused and just not really invested, I suppose. The next book that I finished is Rage of Dragons by Evan Winter. This book I gave 3.5 stars. This book basically follows a society where people are either born gifted or they are not, and depending on like the blood that you have, you're either like a stronger person, so you're like in the noble class, or you are like a lesser person. That's literally what they call it. You're a lesser. And so people who are lesser are usually weaker, they're a little smaller, shorter, all that stuff, whereas people who are like in the noble class are usually a lot bigger, more muscular, has more strength, etc. And then of course there are people who have the abilities, like actual magical abilities, who are considered gifted. So in this book it follows a young boy called Tao, where he is considered as a lesser, but he grew up with these lesser nobles, which are like, so there's lessers and then there's like lesser nobles who are a little bit, you know, better than the ones, basically they're like governor's sons, and then there's like the lesser underneath them, the less like common people, I believe. So Tao, even though he's considered a lesser common, he has been raised and, you know, did a lot of swordplay with some lesser nobles, but one day something happens, an incident happens, and he's actually betrayed in a way by 3 very high ranking people, and his father ends up passing away because of this. And so in a sort of like vengeance scheme, he vows to basically kill them and get revenge for what happened to his father. So to do that, the only way he was able to do so was to actually go into like these blood duels, but the only way to actually get a blood duel is to get into like the ranks of a soldier and work his way up, and then after that, once you are ranked in that sense, you can like blood duel anyone. And so that was how he was going to get vengeance, because if he becomes good enough and he kills them, then there's no repercussions for him because it's under like a duel. So the book just basically follows him as he goes on this quest, or his like just to get his goal of becoming, you know, in this rank and getting his duels and exact vengeance. My biggest issue with this book though was actually the main character Tao. Even though I felt like I liked his drive, I liked his determination, like it was shown throughout the book. I felt like his character growth was done really well, but the beginning part of him, when he was still like a lesser common and he was under the guidance of his father, there were so many things that could have been prevented if his pride didn't get a hold of him. His pride and his anger, I think, was what his biggest downfalls were in the beginning, because like, yes, you know, the first thing made sense what he did, but all the things after that, the resulting like consequences after that, was literally because of his inability to hold back his anger. And even his father kept telling him like, no, like, you know, I'm not gonna go into it, but like, let's just say like his father did tell him otherwise and he didn't listen because of his anger and his pride, essentially. So I don't know, I just felt like a lot of things happened because he was not able to control himself, and I just found that like incredibly childish, because I was like, I don't know, I just feel like things could have been avoided, you know. But that being said though, obviously, you know, if things were avoided, there wouldn't be a story. So he ends up going on to this, like I said, the path, and I did find his character growth to be really, really well done. He learned so much, and at the end of the book I actually really admired him, just because he, like I said, he just had a lot of determination, he had a lot of courage. He never let anyone really tell him otherwise, like tell him like what he can and cannot do, because he always fought through it. He was like, I want to get to, like, because of his goal, he like worked so hard, and like he ended up becoming one of the greatest swordsmen of the entire country, and basically like told everyone that, you know, even though he was a lesser common, he was beating people in the noble class, you know, people who were just significantly like had physical abilities that were beyond him. He was able to defeat them, and it was just insane. Like everyone at that point, like towards the end, was just like, yes, like I know who he is. And he just like did a lot of like crazy things, but like, I don't know, like I admired him. Like at the end of the day, I really admired how his like, he just went to get it, and his like, he really persevered, I guess is what I'm trying to say here. So overall, I really did enjoy this book. I do want to continue on the series. It's just like the beginning part that I was like, So, and also I would say that it's a bit slow at times, because even though there's a lot of action going on, majority of it's actually just him going through like the training process along his like fellow like brothers, like sword brothers. And so if you don't like to read a lot of like training sessions, you don't like to read a lot of like the nuances between like, you know, all of that, then I don't think this book would be great for you. Like it's just not a lot of action in that sense. I would say action didn't really start towards like the last like half of the book. That's when things really start to pick up. But overall, like I definitely want to continue on the series and see like what happens next, because the ending is intense. Like that's all I can really say for this book. Then this next book that I picked up is The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, and I gave 2 stars. Honestly, I was so disappointed. This book basically just follows Snow, President Snow, who was in the Hunger Games, and this is like what happened during the 10th year of Hunger Games, and when he was essentially a mentor to one of the tributes. This was the first year where people were trying to get more engagement with the citizens, and to do so they decided to have some of the students become mentors for these tributes, and just kind of like guide them along the way and make the game more exciting, etc. And honestly, like I really did not like this book at all. In the beginning I was kind of invested. I was like, oh, I'm like kind of curious to know about Snow, you know, like it's just what Hunger Games was like, you know, before the Hunger Games that we know, because at this point in time, like the war had just ended. It was just only 10 years later, and even though that's a while, it's really not that long. Like everyone here very much still remembers, like the war was still very fresh in their heads. So they were obviously facing a lot of like discrimination against the tributes, and just a lot of like animosities between each other. But the thing about Snow that I really didn't like is the ending. Like I really did not care much for how things wrapped up, and there was just so much of this book that I was like, I feel like there were some characters play like pivotal roles with how he ended up being, and yet like I don't know, like I did not care much for this book. That's all I can really say. I didn't like Snow. I didn't like his character. In the beginning, I kind of liked him in a way, or like I was curious about him. But I felt like as the book progressed, like his morals and his ethic just went like completely derailed. And I was like, I'm so confused, because like it's not like your family was like like that or anything like that. Like his cousin was like way different, and she actually was like not for a lot of his decisions, but he just like, because of his own personal gains and his ambitions, he was just like, he forsake everything, and I was not a fan. So yeah, I really don't know, like this book was just really not great, guys. So yeah, anyways, I'm gonna say for this one. Thankfully, the next book that I read was actually fucking amazing, and that is Six Crimson Cranes by Elizabeth Lim. This one I gave 5 stars. First of all, let's just take in this beauty of this book. This is the Fairy Loot edition, and it is so stunning. Yeah, just like everything about it is so beautiful, and I'm so happy I got a copy. I also found out that there is like a bluish version of this as well. So people got like the pinkish version, which is what I got. And then there's another cover that I've been seeing, which just has like a more of a bluish tint to it. So that's really cool. But yeah, this book was fantastic. This book is based on Chinese mythology. It follows a young princess called Shiori, who has been hiding magic her entire life until one day something happens and her magic gets out of control. And because of this, she ends up missing her betrothed ceremony. And unfortunately, due to this incident, it caused her stepmother to take notice that maybe something is going on with her stepdaughter. And before long, Shiori actually finds out that her stepmother has been hiding some dark magic. However, before she can actually do anything and warn her brothers, her stepmother swoops in and turns her 6 brothers into these crimson cranes, hence the title of the book, and curses Shiori by saying that if she ever utters a word, her brothers will die. So now she has to find a way to save herself as well as her brothers from her evil stepmother. At the same time though, she also uncovers this conspiracy to overthrow the throne. This book was incredibly beautifully written. I love the mythology in here. There's also this love triangle that was forming that I really enjoyed, and I have not read a good love triangle in a really long time, and this was everything that I wanted. The only thing I can say about the love triangle is that one of the characters, I wish that he had more screen time, I suppose. I felt like he was very prevalent in the beginning few chapters. Like the first quarter of the book, he was like really there, but then due to circumstances, he ends up kind of like leaving, and he shows up like periodically throughout the book. But I just really wish there was more of him and his interactions with Shiori, because I felt like because he kind of like disappeared due to his like personal things that's happening, you really feel like the love triangle, there was definitely a favored person, obviously. So I don't know, I kind of more curious about this guy though, because he was like, his banter with Shiori was like really freaking cute in the beginning of the book. So I'm just really excited to learn more about him in the sequel, because I feel like the sequel will have a lot more about him and dragons. The other thing I really enjoyed about this book was actually Shiori's relationship with her stepmother. Even though the stepmother was portrayed as evil and everything, there were so many like flashbacks when Shiori was kind of rethinking about her own relationship with the stepmother. And it was like, well, she always did this, like she was so kind to me when I was younger, but maybe it was just all an act. And you really see a lot of ups and downs, which led to her being like incredibly torn with who she is now versus the stepmother she had in her memories. And I just really like that like conflict that she was dealing with, because I felt like that was an accurate representation of, you know, like just a lot of people's relationship with people. Like there's always like goods and bads, right? Like not everyone's relationship is always like positive. There's always like, you know, people have always done things that are like a little negative, a little positive. There's a little like back and forth, and I felt like that was a really good way of just representing that with her stepmother, and just feeling like there's maybe more to the story, and if Shiori should be able to trust her instincts or not. And yeah, like I just really enjoyed the book. The writing is just honestly so beautiful. It's very lyrical, it's very whimsical. Definitely cannot wait to continue on with the series. Then this next book that I picked up is Le Goal, which I gave 4.5 stars. So this is the 4th book in the series. I don't know if this is the last book in the series, but it basically follows a football player as well as a very ambitious young woman, college student, and how one night something happens and between the two of them, and he ends up knocking her up, and now they have a baby, and kind of like dealing with all of that while also juggling with school, with jobs, etc. This is honestly one of my favorite new adult romances out there. It's steamy, but there's also like, I feel like a lot of like steamy books, it really focuses on like the physical aspects of it, and while I enjoy that sometimes, I do like it when there is a lot more like depth to their relationships. And I feel like this series does a really good job of portraying and really like nurturing that relationship, that's not just a physical thing, but there's actually a lot more to it. That being said though, I would say that out of this entire series, this is probably my least favorite one, just because I felt a lot more connected with the first three couples than I did with this one. I don't know why that is. I think it's just because like the girl Sabrina, she was just more like cold-hearted in a way, and she always just kind of like pushed things away, and I was like, I don't know. But the other three were just like incredibly well done. They were like 5-star reads, so this is why this is like a 4.5-star read. So yeah, that's all I can really say for this book. Like if you're looking really a really good steamy like series, like a new adult series, I highly recommend this one that has a great romance representation as well. So it's not just like all about the sex and everything, it's about like their actual, you know, talking about their dreams, their goals in life, and their actual like relationship itself. And I really enjoyed that kind of part more actually than the physical part. So yeah, like I really highly recommend this series. Then this next book that I picked up is Natalie Tan's A Book of Luck and Fortune by Roselle Lim. This book I gave 2 stars, which is actually so disappointing for me. So this book basically follows a woman called Natalie who has finally returned home after many years because of a falling out with her mother due to her dream to become a cook. Now though, her mother has actually passed away, so she is back to her hometown in San Francisco, Chinatown, and it's surprised to see like all the changes that has happened there. And her dream, like I mentioned, has always to become a cook, and after inheriting her grandmother's restaurant and business, she decides to reopen it and basically have a way to actually live out her dream. But after consulting a neighborhood seer, she realizes that she must make these 3 magical dishes for 3 neighbors who are in need of, you know, these dishes, and that is the only way for her own business to become successful. So let's just talk about the positive first. I really loved how this book dealt with gentrification and culture and food, but that was essentially it. I felt like the writing was incredibly jarring at times. For example, there were a lot of like random magical realism that was just there out of nowhere. Like, yeah, I get that there's really like magical like dishes, but like I don't know, I feel like they're just random like words here and there about like how like I don't know, like her tears were suddenly like diamonds, and how she would like see things that were not like normal. That just felt so bizarre to me. Like half the time I read them, I was like, wait, what's happening? Like why is this suddenly happening? Like I don't understand. Not only that, but I don't know why this is considered as a contemporary romance, because the romance in here was honestly such a subplot. In fact, I really didn't care much for the romance whatsoever. It was just there, like just to be there, and it just felt so awkward. Another major issue that I had with this book was Natalie herself. She was just so selfish and incredibly immature that it was a really hard time reading about her, and I felt like even her neighbors know that because they had reprimanded her for being selfish and immature. Like, where have you been all this entire time, and you're never here, and etc. I just felt like I just did not like her character at all. So honestly, this book was really disappointing. There were some recipes in here that sounded really good, but unfortunately though, you can't even make that because they don't even have any of like the measurements or whatever. For example, there is this like crab dish that looks so good, and all it tells you is what's needed. Like, oh, you need some crabs, you need some chicken broth, you need some salt, you need some sesame oil, and then that was it. Like, they didn't tell you like how much you needed, like what are the measurements. Like, you know, I can't really make something without knowing all that other stuff. So I honestly was kind of disappointed too, because I really kind of hope that there will be some cool recipes in here that sounded amazing and I can make it myself, but I can't even do that because there are no measurements, so I don't even know how to do it. So that was also another disappointing thing that I found out about this book. So anyways, it just not a good read. Then this next book that I picked up is Fable by Adrienne Young. This one I gave 4 stars. This book follows a young girl, her name is Fable, whose mother actually passed away due to a shipwreck, and her father, who is one of the most powerful traders in the area, ends up abandoning her to a very not so great island to fend for herself. And since then she has been fighting to, you know, get off the island and get back to her father and resume her rightful place. And finally, after scrounging up enough coins to buy herself passage on a ship, she ends up on a young trader's ship called West. However, things aren't as they seem, and now she must fight to stay alive and survive. I actually really enjoyed reading about the adventure and just finding more about every character, and it was surprisingly easy to fall in love with various characters and just like making sure like I'm aware of what's happening to them and becoming invested. The only issue I had with this book really is the pacing. I felt like even though there was a lot of adventure going on, there were some times I just felt felt incredibly slow when it shouldn't have been. Another element that I also really enjoyed reading was just about all the characters, like strategies and cunningness to, you know, get through certain obstacles. I thought that was really fascinating. So yeah, I really enjoyed this book and definitely cannot wait to pick up the sequel. Also, this cover is so pretty. I love the holographic effects of the letters, and this is also the Fairy Loot edition, so even the edges are glittery. My sister saw this copy and she's like, whoa, that's such a pretty cover, and I'm like, I know. So yeah, like I'm really happy I got this really pretty version of Fable. Then this next book that I picked up is The Blue Witch by Elaine Adams. This book I gave 3 stars. I also talked this book a lot more in one of my readathon vlogs, so I'll link that somewhere above and down below in case you want to check that out. So this is considered as a prequel series to the Legends of Orkney series, which I have not read, but this book basically follows the mother of the, you know, the warrior in that later series when she is still a young witch at this magical academy. All Abigail wants to be is to become a great witch. However, the biggest issue is that her magic is not kicking in and she's about to fail her class. However, just when her new friend's life is actually endangered, her magic kicks in, but things are not as they seem. Something is completely different. And after she finally gets her magic, she does end up almost getting kicked out of school because one of her spells ends up backfiring, and now she must, you know, figure out a way to undo it. I mean, this was just a cute middle grade book, guys. There's not a lot of substance to it. It's very small. It's a very fast read. But that's all I can really say for this book. Then this next book that I picked up is Dry by Neil Schusterman and Joe Schusterman. This I gave 5 stars. Again, I talked about this book a lot more in depth in my readathon vlog, so I will link that somewhere above and down below in case you want to check that out. But this book was amazing. So this book follows a very realistic dystopian situation where what happens if Southern California does actually run out of water. The book mainly follows a girl called Alyssa and her family, as you know, after the water has officially gone out, they call it tap out, what she and her family have to do to survive, especially after something happens and her parents are no longer with her, what she and her brother along with other various characters have to do to survive in this new environment. This is terrifyingly realistic, especially as someone who does live in Southern California. There are so many places that were mentioned here that I was like, I am aware of this place, I have been to this place, this is so weird. And like the entire time I was reading this book, I just felt super fucking thirsty. On the flip side though, there was a lot of educational things that you can learn from this book in terms of how you can survive in case, you know, there is no more water left. So I felt like this book had some scary elements to it, but also some very educational elements to it as well. I also felt like the cast of characters are so diverse. I really enjoy reading about them. I mean, we had this one character who came from a family of like a hardcore survivalist. Like his family had like a wealth of information, and then we had this one badass girl who was just, you know, like willing to do what it takes to survive. Then we had like one sleazeball who was just, I don't know what he was there for, but he definitely brought some added, you know, layers to the story overall. I mean, this book at the end of the day was just incredibly engaging, very fast paced. It was very realistic. I just felt like everything that's happened in this book, I was like, damn, I can totally see this happening. But the most interesting part was just kind of how everyone's reaction to this. I mean, people who are seemingly normal, everyone has this like, you know, politeness to them, but once they were faced with like life or death, they just completely change. And that was actually really fascinating to read, just being like, wow, so this is what people really are like, huh? So overall, highly recommend if you had not picked up this book. Then this next book that I picked up is Legendborn by Tracy Dion. This book I gave 5 stars. It was flipping amazing. This book follows a young girl called Bree, where after her mother passes away, she ends up going to this early college kind of program as a way to kind of get away from what had happened to her. Until the first night that she's there, she ends up witnessing a magical demonic attack. And after a mage's failed attempt to wipe her memory, it ends up uncovering a missing memory that was supposed to be suppressed by another mage that was about her mother and the night that she had passed away. Suddenly she remembers that someone from this Legendborn society was there, and now Bree is trying to figure out what the society has to do with her mother and if they have anything to do with her mother's death. This book was incredibly action-packed with a lot of plot twists and turns, and I really love this Arthurian retelling in a contemporary setting. The only issue I had with this book really were a few like very cliche young adult moments, but honestly like they were so like minor that I just overlooked them, because overall like I really enjoyed this book. Another thing that I really liked reading about was from Bree's perspective as a young black woman, especially in a society where it's basically very like traditional white men, not just like white men but just like white people in general. So there were a lot of dynamics and conversations about what she was dealing with compared to other people who were not black. Not only that, but there was this major plot twist at the very end that I really didn't see coming. Like, I don't know why I didn't see this coming, but it makes so much sense now. So yeah, overall I just cannot wait for the sequel to find out what happens next. Then this next book that I picked up is Beast Player, which I gave 4.5 stars. This book followed a young girl called Ellen, whose mother actually had a very important task to take care of these water serpents that were vital to the kingdom's army. However, one day some of them mysteriously dies and her mother ends up being executed because of this. So now Ellen is alone and trying to survive when a beekeeper actually stumbles upon her and takes her in. And as time progresses and as the story progresses, she finds out that she actually has a special bond with these water serpents as well as these royal beasts, who are these majestic birds that are taken care of by the royal family. And so because of her bond, she ends up becoming a key player to a war. I absolutely adore this book. The book took me by surprise because I really didn't read too much about it or hear too much about it, but this book was fantastic. Like, I love the characters, I love the writing, I love the plot, like everything about it was solid. I really fell in love with Ellen and her like quiet way of communicating with the animals, and I loved how this book spanned almost a decade because you really got to, you know, connect and invest yourself with the characters and what was going on. Not only that, but like the writing itself was incredibly lush, and I love the world building. And like this is a lot more, I would say that this, for a fantasy book, this is more character driven, which I really enjoyed, because even though like, you know, the plot itself was very like a lot of stuff was going on, the writing was very lush, like the character itself, like there's a lot of developments that was happening there, and I really loved learning about them. Like I said, like this book spanned like a decade, so I was super invested in the characters. So the only thing is that I want to find out where I can get the second book, but I had listened to this in audiobook and now I can't find the sequel on audiobook through my libraries, so that's super unfortunate. But yeah, like I really want to know what happens next. I believe like the sequel kind of takes place like a few years after, like she's now like an older woman, and things like happening from there. But like this writing was just so good, and honestly like I was so invested. Like I flew through this book in like a day or two because I was listening to it like on my commutes and everything, and I was just like invested. Like I was like, I need to know what happens next. I like made a lot of excuses to like listen to it more, so like that's how you know when it's like a really good book. All right, then this next book that I picked up is The Storm of Life by Amy Rose Capetta, which I gave 3 stars. So this is the final book in a duology where it follows Theodora and her beloved Strega as they embark on a mission to save their country from this manipulative leader who is trying to exploit Stregas for his own use. So Stregas are people with like magical abilities. So I mean, I felt like this book was enjoyable. It was a light read, but overall it was very forgettable. Like it's been like a few weeks since I read this book and I don't remember much about this book at all. The one really cool factor about this book was that both Theodora and Cielo, who is her Strega, they were both gender fluid. So I just loved how there were like roles of traditional gender roles that were being discussed. I love that they just moved in and out of, you know, a guy's body versus a girl's body, depending on whenever they felt like it. I just felt like that was a really cool element to have, and I don't see that very often in young adult books, so I thought that was really cool and definitely unique in this series. All right, then the next book that I picked up is Devil in the White City, which I gave 2 stars. So this is the only nonfiction that I have picked up in quite some time, and I was honestly very disappointed. I had heard so much about this book from a few years ago, and I had high expectations, but overall I was just confused and I don't know, like just not invested invested at all. So this book basically follows two different plots that's happening. One of them follows Burnham, who is the architect who actually builds the entire like white city for the World Fair. And so you follow his story like every few chapters, where he's just like dealing with like architectural problems, dealing with like building issues, a lot of like the struggles that he was facing. On the flip side, we also follow H.H. Holmes, who is actually a serial killer during that time period, where he essentially was use like the World's Fair like popularity to drive customers into his hotel. So he ends up building a hotel where he literally only, you know, roomed it out to female travelers who were traveling by themselves. And later this hotel became known as like the murder city, or the murder castle, where he committed a lot of atrocities during this time period. And so this book just kind of focused on both elements, you know, like the architecture of this white city, and then H.H. Holmes' like murdering spree during that same time period. It was interesting. I'm not entirely sure why the author decided to write it like this, because besides the fact that it happened around the same time period, they were incredibly different, and each time the chapters switched, it was very jarring. And I also listened to the audiobook, so I usually tend to listen to my nonfiction audiobooks because usually the narrator did a really good job. And I found a lot of great nonfiction reads because of the narrator is bringing everything to life. So I really was like, I usually try to listen to an audiobook, but the switches were very jarring. I was super confused half the time, because suddenly we'll be from this like really intense like, you know, murder mystery kind of happening, so what's going on right now, to suddenly like, oh, we're talking about like something's happening to like this pole, and you know, there's some like water damage or whatever, and I'm just like, what? Like, this is so like, doesn't make a lot of sense to me at all. Honestly, between the two, H.H. Holmes' like story was way more fascinating. I felt like I was listening to a true crime podcast for most of it, whereas for Burnham's story, I just felt like it was just completely overshadowed, because I mean, who wants into like architectural issues when you're listening to like a murder mystery, you know? Like, I felt like I was more invested with what was happening with this murder castle, and you know, him dealing with all like the builders who were building his like mysterious different passages in his building, versus what was happening to Burnham. So overall, like, I just felt like I did not really care much for this book. The biggest issue, like I said, was just why this book was written in these dual timelines, because it really made no sense to me whatsoever. Like, I looked at reviews afterward and everyone was like, why was it written like this? And I was like, you know, right, like, why was it written like this? It makes no sense. So yeah, that's what I can really say for that book. And then the last books that I read was actually Demonstrator. So I did manage to finish volumes 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12. So I think that's like 7 volumes right there, which is majority of like the 5-star books that I read, because I gave all of them 5 stars. They were amazing. I love all of them. Definitely cannot wait to continue on the series. I don't really have much to say about it, because it's just a continuation of a very lengthy manga series. So I mean, if you haven't watched it already or read it already, I don't want to spoil it, but it's amazing. I loved it. I cannot wait to continue on and find out what happens next. There's just so many like adventures that they're facing right now, and I cannot wait to see like what happens with Tanjiro and Nezuko. Like, just everything, like all the characters I just adore. So yeah, anyways, as I say, for this video, this lengthy-ish August wrap up, but I read a lot of great books this time around. Hopefully I can read some more before the end of the year. So yeah, let me know down below, which books have you read in the month of August? Which book did you love? Which book did you not love? Have you read any of the books that I read this time around? What do you guys think about them? But as always, if you like this video, please do give me a thumbs up. It really does help out my channel. And if you like to see more content of me, please do subscribe and hit the notification bell. As always, don't forget to follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye!